Okay, so today we're diving into something that might have you like totally rethinking this whole idea that bigger is better, especially when it comes to business.
Definitely.
We're talking about the whole company of one concept. It's where staying intentionally small
Yeah.
is actually the key to making a big impact in the world, maybe even finding more freedom in your work, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're like so conditioned to think that we have to grow, Giro to
Yes.
succeed,
Yeah.
right? To become like this massive company.
Right, exactly.
But Paul Jarvis, in his book, Company of One, he kind of throws some shade on that whole idea. You know what I mean?
Okay, so that's what we're really digging into today then. Using Jarvis's work as our roadmap to navigate this whole company of one thing.
Exactly. We'll break it all down, the core principles, all that. And we'll look at some businesses that are actually thriving while staying intentionally small.
Yeah.
And hopefully you'll walk away with some fresh perspective on your own goals, whether it's your own business or just your career in general.
See, now you're speaking my language because I think a lot of us,
Right.
whether we're running our own show or just trying to navigate the corporate ladder or whatever it is, we feel this pressure to constantly level up, to aim for that next promotion, that next milestone. Like there's some imaginary finish line we're all racing towards. But what if there's a totally different path?
And that's exactly what Jarvis is saying. He's not saying that growth is a bad thing,
Yeah.
right? But it's this blind pursuit of it. It's the growth at all costs mentality that can actually backfire.
Okay, see, now you've really piqued my interest because you're telling me there's an alternative to burning the midnight oil just so you can say you staled up, right?
Exactly. It can lead to so much complexity, unnecessary stress, and ultimately what Jarvis calls diminishing returns. You're pouring more and more in, but you're not necessarily getting more out.
So instead of that classic startup story we hear all the time,
Right.
Sacrificing everything for explosive growth, what does success actually look like in the company of one model?
It's about recognizing that, bigger isn't always better. And sometimes staying intentionally small, it's the smarter choice. It's more sustainable in the long run, I think. Like one of the most interesting examples that Jarvis uses in the book is this story of Kongugumi. It was a Japanese construction company that thrived for, get this, over 1,300 years.
Wait, hold up. 1,300 years. Okay, they had to be onto something huge, even if they weren't, physically huge, right?
Exactly. And they were like masters of what they did, building temples and, these amazing structures with incredible precision. And they did it all while staying relatively small. But here's the thing, when they finally decided to chase after rapid expansion back in the 80s, it all kind of fell apart.
What do you mean? What happened?
They took on huge debts, and within a few decades, they ended up, they collapsed.
Wow, talk about a cautionary tale. It makes you wonder, in a world that's obsessed with unicorn startups and companies being valued at $1 billion.
Right.
Is it even possible for small businesses to compete anymore?
That's where I think Jarvis throws us a bit of a curveball. He argues that all these advancements in technology have actually leveled the playing field in ways that, honestly, we probably haven't even begun to imagine. Like individuals and small teams.
Okay.
They have access to tools and resources now that used to only be available to massive corporations,
So you're saying the little guy, the small business owner, the freelancer, they actually have a fighting chance these days. Okay, so give me some concrete examples. How is that even possible?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think about drop shipping, for example. You don't need to have a giant warehouse full of inventory anymore or print-on-demand services. You can create custom products without needing expensive printing equipment.
Right.
And, of course, online platforms like, Stripe or Square for payments, WordPress, even YouTube.
Yeah.
These are affordable alternatives to building complicated systems in-house, which would cost a fortune.
Okay, those are some seriously powerful tools. It really is incredible what you can accomplish these days with just a laptop and an internet connection.
Exactly. And that ability to stay nimble, to adapt quickly to changes.
Yeah.
That's a big advantage for companies of one.
It's about resilience.
Exactly. Resilience.
Okay, I like the sound of that. But how does that resilience actually play out in the real world? For someone who's running their own business.
Okay, so imagine you're a small sailboat.
Right.
And you're navigating a storm.
Okay.
You can adjust your sails quickly, change direction, because you're not this massive cargo ship that takes forever to turn around.
Okay, yeah, I can see that analogy. It's about being able to weather the storms, to adapt and adjust as needed.
Exactly. And for a company of one, that often translates into lower overhead, which is huge when the economy takes a downturn,
Right.
And it gives you the freedom to pivot quickly when a new opportunity comes up. Smaller businesses, they're just naturally more agile than these big corporations.
So rather than getting caught up in this frenzy of endless growth, it's more about finding that sweet spot where you're profitable, adaptable,
Yeah.
and you're able to, handle whatever the business world throws at you.
And that's exactly why Jarvis challenges this whole traditional startup model. He actually compares them to temporary organizations, like they're designed for this, like mad dash to growth, and it often leads to burnout, or even worse, failure, because they just haven't figured out how to escape being in the red.
Which brings us to, I think, a really crucial point for the company of one approach. Prioritizing profit from day one.
And, it's interesting you say that, because that kind of leads perfectly into, the next big thing.
Okay.
If we're not talking about just blowing up overnight and getting huge, what are we really aiming for? And Jarvis says it's about cultivating this super loyal following for your business, right? It's about quality over quantity, actually creating real connections that go way beyond just making a sale and moving on,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because you can have the most amazing, revolutionary product or service in the world.
Right.
But if you don't have people who trust you, who believe in what you're doing, it's going to be so much harder to gain any traction,
100%. And Jarvis actually calls this building a tribe of one.
A tribe of one. Okay, now that's interesting. Tell me more about that.
Okay, so think about it, right? Even if you have thousands and thousands of customers, ideally, each interaction should feel personal. You're speaking directly to their needs, you know what I mean?
Okay, that makes sense. But how do you actually make that happen? How do you cultivate that level of connection, especially as a company of one, where it might literally just be you? It seems like it'd be easy to get overwhelmed trying to be everything to everyone.
Right. And it's not about that. It's not about being everything to everyone. Jarvis really emphasizes how important it is to figure out who your ideal customer is.
Right.
Understanding, what are their pain points, what do they struggle with, and then you can tailor your message specifically to them.
So it's about getting really, really specific, even if it means maybe you're excluding some people in the process.
Exactly. And here's where things get, I think, really interesting. Jarvis says, companies of one should aim to out-teach and out-share their competition.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying that I should be giving away, my best stuff for free? That seems kind of counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It does at first, right. But think about it from your customer's perspective,
Yeah.
Would you rather buy from someone who's just constantly bombarding you with sales pitches?
Mm-hmm.
Or someone who's genuinely trying to provide you with value, teach you something new or empower you to do something better?
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. It's about building that trust by becoming a thought leader, a go-to resource in your field.
Exactly. When you're generous with the knowledge you have and your expertise, you're naturally positioning yourself as the authority, as someone who really wants to help people.
Right. It's about shifting away from that transactional, I'm selling, you're buying kind of mindset to something that's more relationship-based. Right.
Exactly. It's about building those relationships, because that trust that you build, it becomes your most powerful marketing tool. Because, let's be real, people are way more likely to buy from someone they actually know, someone they like, someone they trust.
Yeah.
And that trust, it comes from those consistent, valuable interactions.
It's like they say, people buy from people. But it seems like, especially in the digital age, it's not just about, being personable. It's about being authentically helpful. You're genuinely generous with the knowledge that you have.
Yeah. And that generosity, that willingness to, empower the people who are listening to you, who are reading your stuff, that's a huge part of what Jarvis calls trust marketing. It's about showing up consistently, delivering on the promises that you make, and really building relationships that aren't just about a one-time transaction.
That makes sense. But I imagine it also takes a lot of discipline to stick with that approach, especially when you're being bombarded with all these different marketing strategies.
Oh, absolutely. And that is where I think the art of saying no becomes so important.
Ah, yes. The art of saying no. Something I think a lot of entrepreneurs especially really struggle with. So tell me more about how that plays into this whole company of one philosophy.
So it boils down to this. You have to recognize that your time and your energy, those are your most valuable resources, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't say yes to every single opportunity that comes your way without sacrificing your focus, your well-being, and ultimately the quality of the work that you're putting out there.
That's so true. So how do you decide what you should say yes to, and maybe even more importantly, what you should politely decline? Because it can feel like such a balancing act, especially when you're first starting out.
And this is where we circle back to that whole tribe of one concept.
Yeah.
Every decision you make, every project that you take on, it all needs to align with your overall mission, your values, and of course the needs of your ideal customer.
It's not even just about what you're capable of doing, but what you should be doing, right? Like what really lights you up, what allows you to be your best self for your audience.
Exactly. And when you're crystal clear on your why, on the reason behind what you do, saying no to the things that don't fit into that becomes so much easier, because you understand that every single yes has an opportunity cost.
And for a company of one where your time and your resources are already probably pretty limited, being really intentional about those choices is so important for long-term success. And, this whole thing about being intentional, choosing quality over quantity, it feels like that's a recurring theme in Jarvis's work.
It's everywhere in the book. It's woven through like every single chapter. And it even goes beyond just work. Like Jarvis talks about defining enough in all aspects of your life, not just your business.
Right. I think that's so important because it's so easy to get caught up in that whole hustle mentality, that constant pursuit of more, that we forget to even ask ourselves what really matters. It's like we're on this never-ending treadmill, chasing after some like vague definition of success, but we don't even stop to think about if we actually want what's waiting for us at the finish line.
It's so true. And this is where Jarvis introduces this concept of like optimum size. Right? He's saying it's not about blindly chasing after the biggest numbers, the most growth, but about finding that size that actually lets you do your best work, like where you can show up for your customers in a really meaningful way, but also have a life outside of work.
So instead of just assuming like bigger is always better, it's more about finding that Goldilocks zone for your business, right? Like not too big, not too small, just right.
Exactly. And that sweet spot, it's going to be different for everyone, Depends on your goals, your values, even just the type of work that you do. For some people, staying as solopreneur, that might be the perfect fit, But for others, maybe it's having a small team, but like a really tight-knit group.
It's like we've been conditioned to think that like scaling up automatically equals success. But Jarvis is really challenging us to define what success actually means to us, on our own terms.
Exactly. I mean, that's what I love about this whole company of one philosophy. It's like it puts you back in the driver's seat. You get to choose. You actually get to design a business model that fits into your life, not the other way around.
Which has to be so freeing, right? Especially for anyone who's feeling like stuck in the daily grind, burned out because there's all this pressure to constantly do more with less.
100%. And it's not just for like entrepreneurs either. Jarvis also talks about this idea of entrepreneurship. It's basically bringing that whole company of one mindset into whatever role you have, even if it's within a larger organization,
Oh, that's interesting. So even if you're not running your own business, you can still benefit from this whole approach. Tell me more about how that works.
Well, it's about like really taking ownership of the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
Thinking creatively and finding ways to add value that go above and beyond like your basic job description.
So it's almost like becoming a company of one, but within a company.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're bringing that entrepreneurial spirit, that same focus on quality and connection building to like whatever it is that you do.
Yeah. And I can see how that would be beneficial for, not just the individual, but for the company as a whole. It's like you're fostering this culture of like, innovation and ownership.
Right. And it might take, a little extra courage, being willing to maybe challenge the status quo a bit, but it can be so rewarding, like personally and professionally.
This has been such a great conversation, like such a fascinating look at this whole company of one approach. As we start to wrap things up, is there like one final takeaway you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the most important thing to remember is that you have the power, right? You have the power to define what success actually means for you. Don't let anyone else tell you what your business should look like or even what your life should look like. Figure out what your version of enough is. Find what truly brings you joy, and the sense of purpose.
It's about designing a business and a life that you're actually excited about, one that feels aligned with your values and your passions and, your own definition of a life well lived, right?
Exactly. And remember, building a company of one, it's not like you reach this finish line and you're done. It's about being open to constantly learning and experimenting and embracing the freedom to, evolve over time.
Perfectly said. This has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for joining me. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us for this deep dive. If you want to learn more about this, definitely check out Paul Jarvis's book, Company of One. You will not regret it. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep creating a life and work that you absolutely love.